Maria's story began in the quiet corner of a small town, where life was simple for most people but never simple for her. She was a single mom, raising her little daughter Lily on her own. Each morning before the sun rose, Maria would tie her hair back, put on her worn uniform, and head to the diner where she worked. The job didn't pay much, but it was steady, and she clung to it because it was the only way to keep food on the table. The diner always smelled of coffee and fried eggs, and the sound of clinking dishes filled the air. Maria moved from table to table with a tired but polite smile. Her coworkers often wondered how she managed to stay so gentle when life kept pressing her down. But Maria had only one answer in her heart: Lily. Every aching step and every long shift were for her little girl. After long hours at work, Maria returned to their tiny apartment. The building was old, with cracked walls and a leaky roof. The rent was barely affordable, yet the landlord never missed a chance to remind her that payments were due. On the kitchen table, envelopes stacked up, each one a bill she could not fully pay. Sometimes she would sit quietly after Lily went to bed, staring at the numbers, trying to make sense of them. But no matter how hard she tried, the money was never enough. Maria had learned to hide her struggles. She didn't want Lily to see her cry or worry about grown-up problems. When Lily asked, "Mom, why don't we ever go on vacations like the other kids?" Maria would smile and say, "Because our home is our favorite vacation spot." She always found small ways to make their life feel special, like baking simple cookies on weekends or reading bedtime stories until Lily fell asleep. But deep down, Maria was exhausted. Her hands ached from carrying heavy trays at the diner. Her back hurt from standing all day, and her mind never rested. She worried constantly. What if she lost her job? What if the landlord finally forced them out? What if Lily grew up thinking her mother had failed her? These fears never left her, yet she carried them alone, never letting them touch her daughter's innocent heart. In the quiet hours of the night, Maria often thought about her past dreams. Once, when she was young, she wanted to become a pianist. She loved the way music could turn sadness into something beautiful. But life had not been kind. Her parents passed away early. She had no support, and survival became her only priority. The dream of playing music on a stage faded away, replaced by the heavy reality of paying bills and raising a child. Still, the memory of those dreams sometimes returned to her. Like a whisper she tried not to hear, Lily was the light of Maria's world. A curious little girl with bright eyes who asked endless questions, even though Maria had little. She gave Lily all the love she had on her best days. Maria believed that love was enough. On her hardest days, she prayed it would be. Whenever she felt weak, she reminded herself that Lily depended on her. There was no choice but to keep moving, to keep smiling, to keep fighting. Sometimes neighbors looked at Maria with pity. They saw her carrying groceries in the rain or rushing to catch the bus after a long shift. They whispered about how she struggled alone. But Maria ignored their looks. She didn't need pity. All she wanted was respect and a chance for her daughter to live a better life. At night, after putting Lily to bed, Maria would sit by the window, listening to the hum of the city outside. She thought about all the things she wished she could give her daughter: a bigger home, new clothes, maybe even piano lessons. She sighed, but quickly shook away those thoughts. She knew that wishing would not pay the bills. Still, in her heart, she promised Lily would grow up strong, even if it meant Maria had to sacrifice everything. Life was not easy, but Maria faced it with quiet courage. She didn't see herself as brave, but every day she chose to wake up, go to work, and keep going for Lily's sake. That was bravery in its purest form. No one noticed her struggles. No one clapped for her sacrifices, but Maria carried on. Because a mother's love does not need applause. It only needs a reason, and her reason was sleeping in the next room, dreaming sweet dreams, And so, in that little apartment filled with bills and worries, lived a woman who had nothing left for herself, yet gave everything for her daughter. Maria's life was heavy with struggles. But behind every tired smile was a heart that refused to give up. Because no matter how dark the world seemed, Maria believed that as long as she kept moving, as long as she held Lily close, somehow they would find the light. Maria's piano stood in the corner of the small living room. Its paint was chipped, its keys yellowed with age, and some of the notes were slightly out of tune to anyone else. It looked like an old piece of furniture ready to be thrown away, but to Maria, it was treasure. It was the only piece of her old dream she had managed to save. When she was younger, Maria wanted to become a pianist. She loved the way music could make people feel, how a sad heart could be lifted by a melody, how a tired soul could rest in the gentle sound of keys. She had spent hours practicing as a girl, but when life's storms came, she had to let go of that dream. Now, years later, she still carried it inside her, hidden like a secret flame that refused to die. The piano had come into her life by accident. One afternoon, she passed by a second-hand shop while walking home from work. In the back, covered in dust, she noticed the old instrument. Her heart ached just looking at it. She could not afford it, but she walked inside anyway. The owner told her he was about to throw it away because no one wanted it. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She asked if she could take it for free, promising to figure out how to move it later. The man agreed, and that night, with the help of two kind neighbors, the piano found its new home in her tiny apartment. It wasn't much, but to Maria, it was everything. She polished the wood, tightened the screws, and carefully cleaned every key. When she pressed them, the sound wasn't perfect, but it was real, it was music. And for Maria, that was enough, at first. She played only when Lily was asleep. She didn't want her daughter to see her clinging to a dream she had failed to reach. But one night, Lily woke up from a nightmare and walked into the living room. Maria was sitting at the piano, her fingers moving softly over the keys. Lily rubbed her eyes and whispered, "Mom, that's pretty." Maria stopped, embarrassed, but Lily begged her to play again. And from that night, it became their little secret. Whenever Lily was restless or upset, Maria played. The soft notes filled the air, wrapping around them like a warm blanket. Sometimes she played lullabies. Sometimes simple tunes she remembered from her childhood. Other times she created her own melodies, letting her heart speak through her fingers. Lily would curl up on the couch, listening, her tears drying as she slowly drifted to sleep. The piano became more than just an old instrument. It became a bridge between mother and daughter in their hardest times. When the fridge was nearly empty or the landlord knocked on the door asking for rent, Maria would sit at the piano and play. Lily might not have understood everything happening around them, but she understood the music. She knew it meant safety, comfort, and love. Neighbors sometimes complained about the sound drifting through the thin apartment walls, but others listened quietly, smiling to themselves. One old woman across the hall told Maria, "Your music makes me feel less lonely at night." Maria blushed. Not knowing what to say, she never thought her simple playing could touch anyone. She only wanted to comfort her daughter, but maybe, just maybe, her music carried more than she realized. There were nights when Maria sat alone at the piano after Lily was asleep. Her fingers would move slowly, her mind filled with memories of the life she once dreamed of. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine standing on a stage, playing for a crowd, applause filling the room. Then she would shake her head, smile sadly, and remind herself that such dreams were not for people like her. Still, the piano gave her something she thought she had lost long ago: hope. Lily began to love the piano as much as her mother did. Sometimes she climbed onto the bench beside Maria and pressed the keys with her tiny fingers, giggling at the sounds she made. Maria would guide her hands gently, teaching her small tunes. See, baby, she would say, each key has its own voice. And when they all sing together, it makes something beautiful. Lily's eyes sparkled as if she understood every word. Though life outside their apartment was filled with struggles, inside those walls, music made the world softer. It reminded Maria that no matter how poor they were, no matter how heavy her heart felt, there was still beauty to be found. And it gave Lily something priceless: memories of warmth, love, and songs that could turn even the hardest nights into something gentle. Maria never told anyone how much the piano meant to her. To most people, it was just an old, unwanted thing. But for her, it was a reminder that she was more than just a tired waitress. She was still the girl who once dreamed of music. Still the mother who could create peace in the middle of chaos. And though she had no idea how much her playing would one day change their lives, for now it was enough. Every time her fingers touched the keys, the world outside seemed to pause. The rent notices, the long hours, the exhaustion, all of it faded for a while. All that remained was a mother, a daughter, and a piano that held their hearts together. And in those moments, Maria felt alive again. Not as a struggling single mom, but as someone who still carried music inside her soul. The rain tapped against the thin windows of the small apartment. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and thunder rolled in the distance. Lily came home from school with her head down and her little backpack dragging on the floor. Her cheeks were red from crying, and her eyes were filled with hurt. Maria looked up from the sink where she was washing dishes. She knew instantly something was wrong. Lily didn't speak. She dropped her backpack in the corner and ran to her room. Slamming the door behind her, Maria's heart sank. She wiped her wet hands on a towel and followed quietly. From behind the closed door, she could hear muffled sobs. Each sound pierced her heart like a needle. She knocked softly. "Lily, sweetheart, what happened?" But Lily didn't answer. Maria slowly opened the door. Inside, Lily was curled up on her bed, hugging her pillow. Her small shoulders shook as she tried to hide her face. "Go away, Mom," she whispered. Maria's chest tightened. She stepped into the room and sat gently on the edge of the bed. "Talk to me, baby," she said softly. "I can't help if I don't know what's wrong." After a moment, Lily's voice broke through the sobs. "The kids at school laughed at me," she cried. "They said my clothes are old. They said I don't have a dad. They called me poor." Her words came out between sobs. Heavy with pain, Maria felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell her daughter that none of it mattered, but she knew those cruel words had cut deeply. Maria pulled Lily into her arms and rocked her gently. My love, don't listen to them," she whispered. But Lily only shook her head. "Why can't we be like other families, Mom?" she asked, her voice trembling. Maria closed her eyes, holding back her own tears. She didn't want Lily to see her sadness. For a moment, she felt powerless, wishing she could shield her daughter from every cruel word in the world. Hours seemed to pass in silence. The rain outside grew heavier. Filling the room with its steady rhythm, Maria kissed Lily's forehead and tucked her under the blanket. She walked out slowly, her heart heavy. She knew words weren't enough. Her daughter needed comfort, something deeper than promises, something that could reach her heart. Maria stood in the living room, her eyes landing on the piano in the corner. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly sat down on the worn bench. Her fingers rested on the keys. It had been a long, tiring day, and her hands were stiff, but she pressed down gently, letting the first soft note fill the room. The melody that followed was simple, not from sheet music, but from her heart. The notes rose and fell like a gentle lullaby, soft and soothing. Maria closed her eyes and let her emotions pour through her fingers. Each note carried love, strength, and comfort she could not put into words. The music floated through the apartment. Mixing with the sound of the rain outside, in her room, Lily's sobs grew quiet. She lifted her head from the pillow, listening. The music reached her like a hand pulling her out of the darkness. Slowly, she slipped out of bed and padded barefoot toward the sound. When she reached the doorway, she saw her mother sitting at the piano, her face calm but filled with emotion. Lily stood quietly, watching. The notes were not perfect, but they wrapped around her like a warm hug. Maria looked up and saw her daughter. She smiled gently and motioned for Lily to come closer without a word. Lily walked over and leaned against her mother's shoulder. Maria kept playing, her free arm wrapping around her daughter's small frame. For the first time that night, Lily's tears stopped. Her breathing slowed as she listened to the music. It wasn't just sound, it was love. It told her everything would be okay, that she wasn't alone. Maria didn't need to say the words because the piano said them for her. The storm outside raged on, thunder shaking the windows. But inside the apartment, there was peace. Mother and daughter sat together, held by the music. Maria played until Lily's eyes grew heavy. She felt her daughter relax, her weight leaning fully against her. When the final note faded, Lily whispered, "Mom." That was beautiful. Maria kissed the top of her head and whispered back, "Whenever you're sad, I'll play for you, my love." That night, the piano became more than just an old instrument in the corner. It became a lifeline, a way for Maria to heal her daughter's pain when words were not enough. Lily fell asleep in her mother's arms, her heart a little lighter. Maria looked at her sleeping face and felt a quiet strength return to her. She realized that even in their hardest moments, music could bring them hope. What neither of them knew was that the music drifting through their window did not stop at their walls beyond the storm. Someone else had heard it too, but for now, all that mattered was the warmth of that moment, the bond between a mother and her daughter, and the piano that turned tears into peace. The storm outside had calmed, but the streets were still wet. Streetlights reflected in the puddles, making the road glow like broken glass. Charles, a businessman who was visiting the town for only a few days, walked slowly down the street after finishing a long dinner meeting. His expensive shoes splashed lightly in the water. But he didn't care. He often took walks at night to clear his head, away from the noise of meetings, phone calls, and endless numbers. As he passed by the old apartment building, something caught his attention, a sound, faint at first, drifted through the open window of the second floor. It was music, soft and gentle, carried by the night air. Charles stopped, his steps frozen. He tilted his head, listening closely. The sound was not polished, like what he was used to hearing at concerts or on recordings. It was raw, imperfect, but full of something he could not name. The melody rose and fell like waves, sometimes soft, sometimes strong. Charles felt it tugging at something deep inside him. He closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. He had heard countless musicians in his life, many of them trained professionals, but this was different. It felt alive, filled with emotion. He found himself standing still in the middle of the street. As if his feet were rooted to the ground, he looked up at the window. Through the thin curtains, he could see the shadow of a woman sitting at a piano. The glow of a small lamp lit her face faintly. Beside her, a small child leaned against her shoulder. Charles could not hear their words, but he saw the closeness between them. It struck him harder than he expected. Charles was a man used to power and wealth. His life was full of luxury grand hotels, private cars, and high towers of glass and steel. Yet in that moment, standing alone on a quiet street, listening to music coming from a worn apartment, he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt human again. The notes carried more than sound. They carried love, pain, and hope. He wondered who this woman was. Why was she playing with such emotion in such a modest place? He thought about his own life. About how success had brought him money but had stolen away his peace. He had been searching for meaning, though he never admitted it to anyone. The child shifted against the woman's shoulder. And the woman smiled gently as she kept playing. Charles felt a tightness in his chest. He remembered his own mother, long gone now, who used to hum lullabies when he was a boy. It was a memory buried under years of business and ambition. But the music pulled it out. The rain had stopped. But Charles remained standing there. His driver, waiting in the car parked nearby, glanced out in confusion, wondering why his boss was frozen on the sidewalk. Charles raised a hand, signaling him to wait. He did not want this moment to end. He wanted to listen until the very last note. When the music softened and finally faded, Charles let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The street felt different now, quieter, yet somehow warmer. He looked up at the window again. But the curtains were drawn, the light dimmed, and silence replaced the melody. Still, something inside him had shifted. He took a step back and leaned against a street lamp, thinking he did not know this woman. He did not know her story, but he knew she had something rare. Something the world often overlooked. It wasn't skill alone, it was heart. Her music had touched him more deeply than the grand performances he had paid fortunes to attend. Charles stayed there for a few more minutes, staring at the window, part of him wanting to knock on the door, part of him afraid of breaking the fragile magic of the moment. He finally turned and walked slowly toward his car. But his mind was still inside that apartment, replaying every note. On the drive back to his hotel, he remained silent. The driver glanced at him in the mirror, surprised by his thoughtful expression. Charles usually spent car rides on phone calls, planning deals, giving orders. But tonight, he said nothing. He only leaned back, staring out at the passing lights. The music still echoed in his ears by the time he reached his hotel suite. Charles knew one thing for certain. He wanted to know more about the woman who played that piano. He wanted to understand why her music carried so much soul. He didn't know yet how their paths would cross again. But he felt that fate had placed him on that street for a reason. For Maria, it had been just another night of comforting her daughter. She had no idea that her music had reached the heart of a stranger outside her window. A man whose life and choices would soon change hers. But for now, she only kissed Lily's forehead and tucked her into bed, believing the night had ended quietly. And on that rainy street, a billionaire had listened, silently carrying the memory of her music into his own lonely world. Not knowing that it was the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. The next morning, Maria woke up early. Just as she always did, she dressed quickly, made a simple breakfast for Lily, and prepared herself for another long day at the diner. Her eyes felt heavy from the late night at the piano. But she pushed her tiredness away with a smile. She kissed Lily on the forehead before leaving for work, telling her to be brave at school. Meanwhile, across town, Charles was finishing his coffee in the luxurious hotel dining room. He could not forget the music he had heard the night before. The melody had followed him into his dreams, soft and haunting. Now he was curious. He wanted to see the woman behind that music, but he didn't know how to approach her. He decided to take a walk and, without planning it, found himself heading back to the street near the old apartments. That day, Charles entered the diner for the first time. The bell above the door rang as he stepped inside. The smell of fresh coffee and fried bacon filled the air. Customers sat in booths, some reading newspapers, others talking quietly. Charles looked around until his eyes settled on Maria. She was wearing her simple uniform, carrying a heavy tray with a practiced smile. Her hair was pulled back neatly, though a few strands fell loose across her face. Maria hurried from table to table, her movements quick but graceful. She greeted each customer with kindness, even the ones who were rude or impatient. Charles watched silently from a corner booth. At first, he wasn't sure if it was really her. But then he noticed her hands, the same hands he had seen moving across the piano keys in the dim light. They were tired hands, but strong and gentle. Maria noticed him eventually. She walked over with her usual polite smile. Holding a small notepad, "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you?" she asked. Charles ordered coffee, though he barely cared about the drink. He was more interested in studying her closely. She had no idea he had been the stranger listening outside her window the night before. As he sipped the coffee, he observed the way she worked. She bent down to pick up a spoon a child had dropped. Laughing softly to calm the little boy, she refilled cups without being asked. And when an older man at the counter complained about his food, she apologized gently and fixed the problem without frustration to Charles. It was as if she carried the same warmth in her service that she carried in her music. Hours later, when school ended, Lily came rushing into the diner, her backpack bouncing as she ran toward her mother, Mom. She called. Maria's tired face lit up instantly. She crouched down and hugged her daughter tightly. Customers smiled as they watched the little girl throw her arms around her mother's neck. Charles noticed it too. The bond between them was clear and powerful. Maria sat Lily in a booth with a small plate of fries, and while Lily ate happily, Maria returned to work. Charles kept watching. His heart felt heavy as he realized how hard she was working to hold her life together. He noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her smile sometimes wavered when she thought no one was looking. Yet when she looked at her daughter, all her tiredness disappeared. Replaced with love for Charles, it was a strange feeling. He had seen women dressed in jewels and silk, women at grand parties who spoke about money and power. But none of them had moved him the way Maria did with her simple kindness. There was something different about her. Something real. He left the diner without speaking much. Just leaving a generous tip on the table, Maria picked it up later, surprised. She rarely saw such kindness, but she shrugged it off, assuming he was just another traveler passing through. Over the next few days, Charles returned to the diner again and again. Each time he sat quietly, ordering little but observing closely. He noticed the way Maria sometimes rubbed her hands when they hurt from carrying trays, the way she smiled even when she was clearly exhausted. He noticed Lily too, running in after school almost every day, filling the room with her laughter. The more he watched, the more curious he became. He wanted to know her story. Why was she working so hard? Why did she play the piano with such emotion? What struggles was she hiding behind that brave smile? Maria never guessed who he really was. To her, he was just a polite customer, well-dressed, with kind eyes. She served him as she did everyone else, not knowing that he was the same man who had stood outside her window, listening to the music that had poured straight from her heart. Charles left the diner each time with a stronger feeling that fate had brought him here. He had all the wealth a man could ask for. Yet here was a woman who had nothing and still gave so much love to her child and even to strangers. It fascinated him, it humbled him, and though he kept his secret for now, he knew it wouldn't stay hidden forever. Maria, on the other hand, only thought about making it through another day. She didn't notice the way the quiet man in the corner watched her with respect and admiration. She didn't know that her music, her kindness, and her strength had already begun to change the heart of someone powerful, someone who would soon change her life too. Days turned into weeks, and Charles kept coming back to the diner. He always sat at the same booth near the window, sipping coffee slowly while his eyes followed Maria as she worked. She noticed him, of course, but only as a regular customer, polite, quiet, and generous with tips. She never guessed that behind his calm smile was a secret he had been carrying since the night he first heard her play. One afternoon, the diner was quieter than usual. A light rain tapped against the windows, and only a few customers sat scattered around. Maria wiped down tables. Humming softly to herself, Charles watched her, his mind turning over the words he had been keeping inside. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. He wanted to tell her, to finally reveal that he was the man who had stood outside her apartment, listening to her music that night when Maria walked over to refill his cup. He looked at her more seriously than before. "Maria," he said gently. She blinked in surprise. He had never spoken her name. "Yes?" she asked, unsure. He paused, searching for the right words. "The other night I heard music," he began. "It came from your apartment. I was walking by, and I stopped to listen." Maria froze. Her hand trembled slightly as she held the coffee pot. She looked at him with wide eyes, her cheeks turning pink. "You heard that?" she whispered, embarrassed. He nodded. "Yes, I did, and it was beautiful." Maria quickly shook her head, her voice low and hurried. No, I'm not a real pianist. I was just playing for my daughter. It's nothing, just a habit." She set the coffee pot down and tried to laugh it off, but her heart raced. The idea of someone hearing her private music made her feel exposed. Vulnerable, Charles leaned forward slightly, his tone calm but sincere. "Don't say it's nothing. I've heard many musicians in my life, some of the best, but your music was different. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. It had heart." Maria stared at him, unsure how to respond. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was mistaken, but deep down she knew he wasn't lying. Her music had always carried her emotions. It was the only way she knew how to release her pain and love at the same time. But to admit that to a stranger felt impossible. She laughed nervously, shaking her head. "I'm just a waitress. I don't have talent. I don't have training. That piano is old and broken. I only play to calm my little girl. That's all." Charles smiled gently, but his eyes were serious. "Maria, sometimes people with real talent don't even realize how much they shine. You may not see it, but others do. Your music touched me that night in a way I can't explain." Maria's chest tightened. She looked down at her hands, rough from years of hard work. She thought of the bills on her table at home, the long shifts at the diner, the life that had forced her to bury her dreams. How could this man see anything special in her? She wanted to believe him, but her fear held her back. "I don't know why you're saying this," she murmured, "but I don't belong to that world anymore. I gave up music a long time ago. Life doesn't leave space for dreams." Charles studied her face, seeing the pain behind her words. He recognized the way she had learned to push her dreams aside for survival. He had seen the same look in people who had been beaten down by life, but still carried a hidden spark. He leaned back, deciding not to push her further. Instead, he simply said, "Sometimes dreams find their way back to us when we least expect them." Maria felt her heart race, but she forced a smile, trying to move on. Another customer called her name, and she hurried away, relieved to escape the intensity of the moment. Yet as she worked, her mind kept replaying his words. She told herself it didn't matter, that he was just being kind. But something inside her stirred, a tiny spark of the girl she once was. The girl who had dreamed of filling rooms with music. For the rest of his visit that day, Charles said little, but his eyes followed her with quiet respect. He could see that she was not ready to believe in herself. Not yet, but he also knew he had planted a seed, and seeds, no matter how small, had a way of growing. When Maria closed the diner that evening, she walked home with Lily. Her daughter skipped happily beside her, talking about her day at school. Maria smiled and nodded, but her thoughts were far away. She kept hearing his voice. Your music was different. It had heart. She tried to push it away, but deep inside, She felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope mixed with fear. Back in her apartment, after Lily had gone to bed, Maria sat at the piano, her fingers touched the keys. Hesitant, she played softly, each note trembling. She thought of the stranger's words and felt both embarrassed and strangely moved. Could he really mean it? Could someone like her still have something worth sharing with the world? She shook her head and laughed bitterly at herself. "Silly," she whispered. "I'm just a waitress," yet her fingers kept playing. The music filling the room again, and though she didn't know it, the first steps of a new journey had already begun. Charles, back in his hotel room, stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. He thought of Maria, her shy smile, her tired hands, and the music that had touched him so deeply. He knew she would not believe in herself easily. But he also knew he could not walk away. Something about her, about that night, had tied his heart to hers, and no matter what, he intended to see where it would lead. Charles spent the next few days thinking about Maria. He had revealed to her that he had heard her music, but he could see the wall she built around herself. She was embarrassed, almost afraid to believe that her gift had value. He could not get her face out of his mind, the way her eyes looked down, the way her voice trembled when she said she was just a waitress. Charles knew she was more than that. Much more. One evening, after a long meeting in the city, he sat alone in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling. He thought about all the people he had helped before: artists, schools, charities, musicians. His wealth had built theaters and funded scholarships, yet nothing had touched him the way Maria's simple music had. It wasn't about money, it was about the honesty in her notes, the way her piano spoke of pain and love at the same time. He decided he could not stay silent any longer. He had to give her a chance. The next day, Charles returned to the diner as usual. Maria was busy with plates and trays. Her daughter, Lily, came rushing in after school and hugged her tightly. Charles watched, smiling quietly. He waited until the diner slowed down before asking Maria if he could speak to her privately. She looked at him curiously, nervous but polite. When they stood outside near the back door, the smell of rain still fresh in the air, Charles cleared his throat. "Maria, I know you don't think much of your music," he began, "but I want to tell you who I really am." She frowned slightly, confused. Charles continued, "I'm not just a traveler passing through. My name is Charles Whitmore. I'm involved in several foundations that support music and education. I've spent years helping artists, musicians, and schools." Maria blinked in surprise. She had heard the name before. Newspapers sometimes mentioned him as one of the wealthiest men in the country. Her hands tightened nervously on the tray she was holding. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "Because I believe you have something special," Charles said. "Your music isn't just sound, it's emotion, it's truth. And the world needs to hear it." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I want to offer you an opportunity. Maria, if you're willing, I can help you play again. Not in secret, not just for your daughter, but for others too." Maria shook her head quickly, almost in fear. No, I can't. That's not possible. I can't accept charity. I don't belong in that world. I don't even know how to perform anymore. I've forgotten everything." Her words spilled out fast, like she was afraid of even imagining it. Charles raised his hand gently. "This isn't charity, Maria. It's recognition. I see something in you that you don't see in yourself. Let me help bring it out, not for me, but for you and for Lily." At the mention of her daughter's name, Maria hesitated. She looked down at her worn shoes. Her mind was filled with doubts. She thought of the bills waiting on her table, the long shifts at the diner, the neighbors who would laugh at the idea of her being a pianist. But then she thought of Lily's small face, the way her eyes sparkled whenever Maria played. "What if I fail?" Maria whispered, her voice trembling. Charles smiled kindly. Failing isn't the worst thing. The worst thing is never trying. You've already given up once. Don't let life take your gift away again. His words struck her deeply. She felt tears sting her eyes. But she quickly wiped them away. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, barely louder than a whisper. "I want you to play at a small local event," Charles said. "Nothing big, just a gathering of people who love music. I'll arrange everything. You only need to sit at the piano and play as you did that night for your daughter." Maria's heart pounded. The idea terrified her, but a tiny spark inside her began to glow. For years, she had locked away her dream, convinced it had no place in her life. And now, a stranger, not a stranger, a man who had listened, was giving it back to her that night. Maria sat at her piano after putting Lily to bed. Her fingers trembled on the keys. She thought about the possibility of playing for others. Her stomach twisted with fear, but when she pressed the keys, the sound filled the room with hope. Lily, half asleep, whispered, "Mom, play again." "I love when you play." Maria smiled through her tears. Maybe, just maybe, Charles was right when the day of the event arrived. Maria stood nervously near the piano in a small hall filled with chairs. The audience was not large, just a few dozen people. But her hands shook as if the whole world were watching. Charles stood nearby. Giving her a reassuring nod, she sat down slowly, her breath unsteady. For a moment, she thought she would run. But then she remembered Lily's words. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes were shaky, but soon her heart took over. The music flowed from her fingers, carrying all her struggles, all her love, and all her hidden dreams. The audience sat in silence, listening as if they were hearing something rare, something true, by the time she finished. Her hands were trembling, and her eyes were wet with tears. But then she heard it applause, warm and genuine, filling the small hall. Maria covered her face, overwhelmed. She had thought her music belonged only in the shadows of her apartment, but now it was reaching others. Touching them, Charles watched with pride, knowing this was only the beginning. Maria walked off the stage and hugged Lily, who whispered, "Mom, you were amazing." For the first time in years, Maria believed it too. Her dream was alive again, fragile but real. And it all started with one man who listened outside her window on a rainy night. Maria's life began to change slowly after that night at the small event. She still woke up early for her shifts at the diner. She still counted every coin carefully when paying bills. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt like she was only surviving. She felt like she had something more, something worth holding on to. Her music was no longer a secret locked inside the walls of her apartment. Charles had kept his promise with his help. She began playing at the community center. At first, it was only once a week. A small group of children gathered around the piano while she showed them the basics. Her hands trembled the first time, but when she saw the excitement in their eyes, her fear disappeared for the first time in years. She wasn't just a waitress or a struggling mother, she was a teacher, a musician, a source of inspiration. Lily sat proudly in the front row every time. Her little face lit up with joy as she watched her mother. Whenever Maria's hands touched the keys, Lily's smile grew wider. She would tell everyone, "That's my mom. She plays beautiful music." Those simple words gave Maria more strength than she had ever known. The community center began to grow busier. Parents brought their children not only for lessons, but also for the comfort Maria's music brought. Some said her playing had a way of calming even the most restless hearts. Others said it gave them hope. Maria didn't fully understand it herself. She only knew that every note she played came from love for Lily, love for the dream she once buried, and love for the people who now listened. Charles often visited quietly. never pushing her, never demanding thanks. He simply sat at the back of the room, watching her transform. He knew he had the money and influence, but what Maria carried was far more powerful. It was something money could never buy. He admired her humility, her strength, and the way she poured her whole heart into the smallest things. At the diner, things didn't change overnight. Maria still wore her uniform, still rushed from table to table. But the other workers noticed something different about her. There was a new light in her eyes, a quiet confidence in her steps. Customers began to smile more when she served them, sensing the warmth that seemed to follow her everywhere. Lily too blossomed. She no longer cried over the cruel words at school. She no longer felt ashamed of what they didn't have, because now she had something greater, a mother who showed her the power of courage and dreams. Whenever her classmates teased her, she would smile and say, "You don't know my mom, but one day you will." Maria never became rich, and she never cared to. What she gained was more valuable. She had respect, fulfillment, and a place where her music could live again. She realized that she didn't need a grand stage or a huge audience. All she needed was the chance to play, to teach, to share the gift that had once been buried. At night, when she returned home with Lily, the old piano still waited in the corner of the living room. It was the same chipped, imperfect instrument, but now it carried new meaning. It was no longer a symbol of a dream lost, but of a dream reborn. Sometimes Maria sat down after a long day and played softly. Lily would curl up beside her, eyes closing as the music lulled her to sleep. Those were the moments Maria cherished the most. One evening, as she finished a lesson at the community center, a woman approached her with tears in her eyes. She said, "Your music reminds me of my mother. I haven't felt peace like this in years. Thank you." Maria didn't know what to say. She had never imagined her simple playing could touch strangers so deeply. She walked home that night with her heart full, realizing that her gift had found its way into other people's lives. Charles continued to support her quietly, but he always made sure she knew one thing: her success was her own, not something he created for her. He simply opened a door, and she walked through it with courage. That was what he admired most about her. Maria often thought back to the stormy night when Lily had cried, when she had sat at the piano just to comfort her daughter. At the time, she believed it was just another small act of love. She never knew that moment would change everything, that someone outside was listening, that a billionaire with a weary heart would be touched by her simple song. Now, as she looked at Lily sleeping peacefully, Maria understood something important. Dreams don't die. They may sleep. They may be buried under the weight of life. But with love, courage, and a little faith, they can come alive again. She had thought her music was gone forever, but it had only been waiting for the right moment, for the right listener. And so, in a small apartment with cracked walls, lived a mother and daughter who had found something greater than wealth. They had found music, hope, and a future bright with possibility. Maria no longer felt invisible. She was not just a waitress. She was a mother, a musician, a teacher. And all of it began with one simple act: coming a crying girl with a piano, never knowing that a billionaire was listening.